but we have Leah Bendlin jumping in, super short notice. And she is a very knowledgeable mushroom girl from Portland. She loves to do mushroom science and identifying, which is the perfect thing for us today. So she's also a board member of the Oregon Mycological Society, and she leads mushroom ID walks and classes all around the area and with several various organizations. And today she will be focused on teaching us some stuff about the most common and relatively maybe easy to identify Pacific Northwest fall mushrooms. So say all hello to Leah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and especially for the people who just got into mushrooms. This presentation is for you. We're going to be talking about some of the most common ones, and hopefully you can get to know them and feel a little bit more confident about finding them yourselves. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to share my screen now. There we are. And I am also going to keep a chat window open. So if you have any questions while the presentation is going on, feel free to just pop into the chat and I'll try and deal with those questions as they come up. So ask away. Okay, so to start with, as Kirsten pointed out, some of these mushrooms are not actually as common as we would like for them to be, such as the one that's on the first slide here. But these are the mushrooms that we would often like to find most commonly, and with a focus particularly on edibles and things that you might mistake for these edibles. So without further ado, so this is the first mushroom that I learned and the one that really set it off for me, because it was a very good chanterelle year when we went out looking for the first time. So I live in Oregon, and our state mushroom is Canthralis formosus, the Pacific golden chanterelle. There are a couple of different species of chanterelle that do grow in the Pacific Northwest, but this one is kind of the most iconic one that's all golden color all over. It grows on the ground. So if you find something that you think is a chanterelle and it's growing on wood, maybe consider that it's something else. It has these shallow, blunt ridges on the underside. So that's what you're seeing right here. They are ridges or false gills instead of true gills. True gills on mushrooms are basically sharp like the edge of a piece of paper. And on the chanterelle, these ridges are blunt, and they have they're blunt and shallow. They have kind of a rounded edge. And they do this thing called anastomosing, which just is a fancy word to say that they fork irregularly and join and have little veiny bits in between. So the lookalikes are going to, they may have some forking, but it's not going to be irregularly veiny in this kind of way. If you smell them, they have kind of an apricot scent, or some people just describe it as fruity. And if you peel apart the stipe, so stipe is just the mushroom word for stem, you'll find that they peel apart like string cheese and they have a whitish flesh on the inside. So all of these features are going to help you to differentiate it from a couple of things that could look similar. Okay, and then here is the white chanterelle, another species that does grow around here. You'll find that if you poke them a couple of times, they do start to bruise kind of yellowish. So they can start looking more like a yellow chanterelle, but this is just as edible and delicious. I usually find these at higher elevations. I don't know if that's been everyone's experience, but higher elevations than the golden chanterelles. And then this is the one that is most commonly known as the false chanterelle. There are a couple of things that could be referred to as false chanterelles, but this is the one that really has that common name. Hygrophorapsis or antiocha. And if you can see from the top here, it really does kind of have that chanterelle look to it, but you can see that there's kind of zones of color that are a little bit different, lighter or darker on it, whereas that chanterelle, we'll go back here, is really more or less the same over the entirety of the whole cap. Okay, the cap flesh on this is also thinner. And if you look on the underside, it has true gills on the underside, which means that they're rather sharp. On this species, they do fork, so you can see there's regular Y forking that happens here, but then they don't rejoin in those forks with or have little veiny bits that go in between them. And the best reason that I have heard for the chanterelles having their ridges be called false gills is that the spores on the false gills are happening all over the entirety of the underside, whereas your true gills, there are spaces in between each gill where there are no spores being produced and it's just sterile. So that seems like a fairly good explanation to me as to why they're false gills or true gills. And the gills on this false chanterelle are really bright orange. They're not that kind of golden yellow color. They're quite orange. And this species can be found on the ground, but it also can be found growing on wood. So again, if you're thinking that you have a chanterelle and it's on wood, you might want to reconsider. And this is probably non-toxic. I have heard people say that they ate them without any issues, and then I've also heard people say that they had GI upset from eating them. They're not recommended for eating in general. Here's another one that is mistaken for chanterelles, the woolly pine spike or Cruogomphus tomentosis. Yeah. It doesn't actually look that much like a chanterelle from here, but like especially if you look at this little one at the bottom, and they happen to be growing in with chanterelles, which sometimes happens. They can be growing in the same environment. Those hairs can be kind of matted down, or if it's been raining a lot, the color looks really similar. And they also have these decurrent true gills. So decurrent means that the gills are starting to run down the stipe like this, rather than being attached in a way that just goes straight across or goes in before it meets the stipe. So chanterelles and the false chanterelles are going to have these decurrent forms. So that's why sometimes people mistake them. However, on these, they are sharp like the edge of a piece of paper. On these, they're not forking at all. And over time, these gills will become dark with the accumulation of the spores on this. And you can actually see some of the spore buildup on the stipe of this one. And so over time, they will not be anywhere near the same color as the chanterelle will. The chanterelles have very light colored spores, so their ridges on the underside don't get darker over time. This one is you could eat it, but it tastes really bad. It does taste bad. I try and make a habit of eating all of the things that you can eat without having some problem, just to see what the taste is like, and I really don't recommend this one. It was pretty gross. They also turn bright red if you throw them in the pan and cook them, so that should also be a clue that you don't have a chanterelle.
Hey, Leah, we have a question in the chat.
Okay, I see. Are false chanterelles present in the Pacific Northwest? Yep, so everything that's in this presentation are species that grow in the Pacific Northwest. However, they're in different regions. There are different things that could be mistaken for chanterelles. So if you're coming from the East Coast, especially there's a mushroom called the jack-o'-lantern mushroom, which glows in the dark and is really cool, bright orange, grows in clusters on wood. We don't really have that in the Pacific Northwest, but it is very common on the East Coast, and that can make you very ill if you eat it. The ones that kind of look like chanterelles in the Pacific Northwest aren't very dangerous. They're mostly just gross if you eat them. Okay. And here's the last one that people frequently will mistake for chanterelles. Turbineless species, or if you have an older field guide, they might be called Gomphus. And the common names for these are usually woolly chanterelle or scaly vase chanterelle. And I've got two different species here, Turbineless flaccosus on the left and Turbineless kaufmannii on the right. That one looks like a sarlacc from Star Wars, you know, those like wormy things that come out of the sand and have all the teeth that are going inside. So if you find something that looks like it has all of these teeth pointing on the inside, then it's probably not a chanterelle. Chanterelles are usually fairly smooth on top, but can sometimes weather, so there's some uneven bits. But you see on the underside, this one is confusing to people because it does actually have these ridge-like things that don't look like true gills like the other lookalikes. However, it's more of an irregular kind of a wrinkliness than it is just vertical lines that all kind of go in one direction. And the other things that are really obvious about it is that it's bright orange on top rather than that golden color. And this bright orange is also, it's kind of furry and there's like tufty hairs on the top. And it's much more vase shaped. And you can see that the bottom and the top are two distinctly different colors, whereas the chanterelle is usually going to be more or less the same color throughout. And this species in the same genus, isn't quite as orange on top, but again, it has those kind of toothy, scaly bits on top that the chanterelle is not going to have. And as far as eating these, I know that they are sold for food in Mexico, but I do have a friend who ate some of them from the market in Mexico, and he ate quite a lot of them in order to test their edibility, and he did get some diarrhea from that. And that's the general caution on these, is that they can give people GI upset, especially if they are eaten in quantity. So they are not recommended for consumption. Okay, but this one is a great edible. Love this one. The porcini or Bolitas Edulus. You may also know it as sep or penny bun, or the king bolete. What's that?
Steinpilz.
Steinpilz?
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Aaron asks, are the Turbineless in the Pacific Northwest the same as in Mexico? That is a good question, and I don't know the answer to that specifically, but I have heard from people who have eaten them in each of the places, and it seems like the reactions are the same. So, okay, so Bolitas Edulus. For folks who are just learning and don't know what boletes are yet, boletes are a group of mushrooms that have a cap and a stipe, okay? And then on the underside of the cap, there is a spongy pore surface rather than having gills. So you can't see it in this picture, but you'll see it in some of the other boletes coming up. On this particular type of bolete, and there are many types, it has kind of a hamburger bun color cap to it, often with this lighter edge right around here. And the pore surface on the underside of this cap starts out kind of whitish, and then it becomes more yellow over time and eventually turns kind of a greenish color with the accumulation of these brownish green spores. And one of its key identification features, besides its hamburger bun cap and its very large size, there's a reason it's called the king bolete, is that it has reticulation on the stipe. So reticulation is this raised fishnet pattern that is happening on the stipe here. See all of this white texture? And this one is particularly covered in that reticulation, but there's always going to be some of it, at least at the very top of the stipe. It's not always covering the entire stipe, but that's a feature that you really want to look for. And these are delicious edibles. You may find them in dried mushroom mixes. They go with practically anything that mushrooms are good in. They're great dried. So they do tend to get pretty buggy. So there are these little larvae that will be inside of them. So there's a fungus gnat that lands on side of them, on them, lays its eggs, and then you cut them open and there's a bunch of maggots inside. and it's pretty nasty. But you know, the only thing that the maggots have eaten the whole time is this mushroom. And so they're basically made of mushroom. So you can eat them. There's no harm that's going to come to you from eating them, you know, unless you're eating so many of them that the mushroom is rotten and filled with bug poo or whatever. So, you know, cut it open and decide how many maggots is okay for you personally. I'm willing to eat quite a few. And Lee asks, are they in season now? They are in season now. They're just starting, depending on where you're going. So I am a little bit south of you, so I don't know exactly when your season begins and ends. But ours in the mountains starts in around September, although I've seen them sooner than that, and it goes on the coast until maybe early November. Okay. And Lee asks, where are they found? Under what trees? So I usually find them under the shore pines on the coast, but they can grow with other trees as well, depending on where you are. Oaks in certain areas, under spruces is also another good place to look. Okay. And then there are admirable bullets. So these ones grow in association with hemlock trees, and you can often find them on wood. And that is pretty weird for bullets. They usually grow on the ground and not on wood. So this is kind of an exception. And if you find a bullet growing on wood in the Pacific Northwest, there's a very good chance that it's going to be this. And they have kind of a brown suede-like cap, and they often get these little kind of galaxy stars on them where it fades away a little bit. And they have a yellow pore surface that becomes more kind of yellowish green and smushier over time. Although even when the caps are starting to degrade a bit, I find that the stipes are often in good shape. They stay nice and firm. So you can eat this. It has kind of a lemony flavor on it. They're not quite as good as the king bullets, but you know, if you find them, they're pretty good. Okay, and then there's the Zeller's bullet. So this actually, if you are a taxonomy nerd, this did get split up a little while ago. So the one in the picture is actually probably not the Zeller's bullet, but one that's called Xerocomelus atropurpureus. But I think it's still fine to call it the Zeller's bullet. For the folks who are not familiar, the mushroom world and also the plant world are really being shaken up by all of this new DNA evidence. So things that we once were calling all of these European species names, turns out that we don't actually have those species here and they're getting renamed all the time. So that can be frustrating, but the mushrooms actually stayed the same. So it doesn't really matter necessarily if we're calling them a different name, if we just want to eat them. So here's the Zeller's bullet. You can tell it because it has a very dark cap on top. It has a very red stipe on it, and it has a yellowish pore surface. So that's a pretty striking combination of those three colors. And then sometimes the pores will bruise blue on the underside. It is a species complex, so some of them are going to bruise blue more than others. And this is edible, especially if you can get them nice and young like this. They have a pretty good texture. They do tend to get kind of smushy over time as they get older. They don't have that much flavor in my opinion, but they make good bulk when you can't necessarily find other things. And Kirsten says always cook them.
But because the question, should you eat them off the ground? You can nibble a little bit to taste certain ones. That is a good idea, but also spit it out. It's not a good idea to eat mushrooms raw.
Yep. Yeah, so there are a few exceptions that people do eat raw, but there are toxins in some mushrooms that can easily be cooked out. It's supposed to make the mushroom more digestible to cook it. And even like your Agaricus bisporus, that's the common white button mushrooms, they have a weak carcinogen in them called agaritine. that very easily breaks down with cooking, but is there if you eat them raw. So I wouldn't even recommend eating those raw.
Mhm.
Okay, this one is the Oregon reishi, Ganoderma oregonense, and it specifically grows on conifers, sometimes even hemlock. There's one that grows Ganoderma tsuge that also grows on the East Coast. And until recently, it was thought that maybe it was here, but it seems like they're all Ganoderma oregonense. The color on them is just super variable, and they grow on various conifers. So the color can be anywhere from this, like a candy corn colored, with the white and yellow and red. And then later on, it becomes this more kind of wine to brick red color. And they're pretty shiny, and they often have this sort of ET, the extraterrestrial neck on them. And then they're frequently covered in their own brown spores. So the spores will shoot out of the pore surface on the bottom and then land on the top, and then they will be dusted in these cocoa brown spores. So you can actually rub the top of the cap of those caps and rub those brown spores off and see the shininess underneath. And this, they are supposed to be good for practically everything under the sun as far as medicinal use goes. I know that people use them for immune boosting and things like that. And here's one that people often mistake for the Oregon reishi, the red-belted conch, Fomitopsis munsii, or if you have an older guide, it might say Fomitopsis pinicola, but that turns out to be a European species, and it's not what we have locally.
Mhm.
This also grows on conifers, and it also has kind of a similar color scheme to it, but it usually does not have that kind of ET neck on it. It doesn't have brown spores. It has really light colored spores, but you don't usually see them because it doesn't produce them very prolifically. And it isn't shiny in the same kind of way. It's really a lot more matte on top. And the Oregon reishi is an annual species, meaning that the fruit bodies will fall off after one season, whereas this, the red-belted conch, will grow in the same place year after year, just getting new bands of growth on the same mushroom. So it tends to be really hard and woody, whereas the Oregon reishi is kind of, has a softness to it, like you can squish it between your fingers. It's not going to be as hard. And I know that some people do use these for some medicinal properties as well, but it's supposed to be, I guess, not as good as the Oregon reishi. Okay, this one is Hyphaloma Fasciculare, or the sulfur tuft, called the sulfur tuft because it's sulfur yellow and it grows in tufts, little clusters that are growing together. And this grows on wood. They are very common and very striking. They make great photographic subjects. When you look at the very young ones, they have super bright yellow young gills, like highlighter yellow. And then those gills will turn darker over time with the accumulation of spores. For folks who are just starting out, if you're looking at spore prints in the field, you don't necessarily always need to take a mushroom home with you to figure out what the spore color is. You can often tell in the field in something like this, where if you have two caps and one is overlapping the other, you can just say, move this one that's on top and see that there is a dark cast falling on the one that's below. This has a very dark purple brown spore color that drops on it. And you can also see right at the edge here, there's remnants of the partial veil, which is a membrane that covers those young gills when they're young, when they're not ready to let out spores. And then they open and there's little bits of that membrane that stick to the outside of the cap here. And they have that spore color that is sticking to them. So once you learn those different ID features, you can look for these clues in the field without having to take it home for a spore print every time. And these are very bitter and they are poisonous. They can cause things like vomiting and convulsions. They taste really bad anyway. You can taste and spit any mushroom out, even if they're poisonous mushrooms. So you just don't want to swallow any poisonous mushrooms. But like there's another one that looks very similar to this one that's in the same genus, the smoky gilled wood lover, they call it, Hyphaloma Capnoides. That one is good to eat. And they look very similar, but the taste is very mild on it. So it's kind of an advanced ID, but you taste a little bit of the cap to try and tell them apart. You swirl it around in your mouth for like 15 seconds, let the flavor develop, and then you completely spit it out and don't swallow any of it. And this one will be noticeably bitter. Okay. Another one that grows in clusters on wood is honey mushrooms. I've seen a lot of photos people are posting of really, really large ones this year. And they have these little scruffy bits that are on the top of the cap. These ones are in very good condition, but if after they weather a bit, it can look a bit smoother. They have very tough fibrous stipes that are stuffed with a cottony-like material. They have white spores. So in this picture, each of the mushrooms is still covered with the partial veil. So that's that bit of membrane that's right here covering the gills before they're ready to let out spores. When those spores are ready to come out, that membrane will break and it will leave a ring on the stipe. So a bit of that membrane will stay right here. And if you have overlapping caps, you can see that those white spores will fall onto the caps below. And these are edible. Most people can eat them just fine. Some people do not have a good time with them and experience some gastrointestinal issues like stomach upset or diarrhea. I can eat as many as I want. My mom eats one of them and she gets sick. So with any new mushroom, you want to just try a little bit your first time and see how you react to it. So, you know, if you're one of those sensitive people, you don't go overboard. Okay, here is the shrimp russula. So russula is a very big genus of mushrooms, but they're fairly easy to at least tell that you have a russula. And the way that you tell that you have a russula is that you break the stipe on it. And as long as that mushroom is pretty fresh, it's going to break like chalk. And the reason that it breaks like chalk is that it has a bunch of these round cells in the mushroom called spherocysts. And they are packed together just like this so that you can break them apart and they just break any which way, just like a piece of chalk. That's opposed to other mushrooms, which will have cells that are more elongated, so that when you break them, they kind of peel apart and they're not breaking like chalk. Don't rely too heavily on any one feature though, because I have seen some poisonous Amanita species break in that way before. This one, however, this particular russula is a very good edible. It has an odor that's kind of shrimpy, especially as it gets older. It will smell more like shrimp. It's generally kind of purplish on the cap, although it's a little bit variable. The stipe breaks like chalk. That's true for all the russulas. And the stipe turns brownish where bruised. So you can see that someone here has scratched the stipe on it a little bit and it turns that brownish color. And the spore color on it is a yellowish color. And not all russulas have that particular shade of spores. They can be anywhere between white to kind of orangish. So the particular spore color of your russula does matter. And if you nibble a small bit of the cap on this, you'll find that it has a very mild flavor to it. And I really like this russula better than other russulas, although most russulas are edible. And Lee asks, are they in season now? And yes, they are in season now, although I particularly see them in the early part of the fall, but they can go all the way through until the freezes. And Tina asks, don't shrimp russulas also get a blush on the stipe? And yes, they do. I've got this sometimes with purplish on the stipe. They don't always have a purplish blush on the stipe, but they often do. Okay. And here is a russula that is not generally recommended for eating. It may not be exactly this species Amanita group, but there are several that have this very bright red cap color. So contrast it with this purpley red color of the shrimp russula. And if you bite into this thing, it's going to be super spicy, peppery, hot. And although books generally list it as being poisonous, I have read that it actually is not, and that Charles McIlvaine, who was a guy who just like, he was a mycologist who just ate all of the mushrooms, basically, just to see what would happen. He got lucky and never died from it. But he fed this to a whole bunch of different people after cooking them well. I think maybe he boiled them, and nobody got sick from it, but it did taste bad. So even though it's called the sickening russula, it seems like if it is cooked or boiled, that it probably is not actually going to be poisonous, but if you ate it raw, you would probably get some gastrointestinal problems. I'm not recommending it, but russulas are not that dangerous. Okay, and here's the lobster mushroom. So lobster mushroom is a weird thing in that it is a fungus that grows on the russula. So it's not really like a mushroom in the typical sense in itself, but it's this other fungus that turns the russula mushroom into this. So it grows on an all-white russula called Russula brevipes, and turns that all white mushroom into this orange kind of grainy textured mushroom that's crunchy. It changes the flavor a little bit. I don't think it actually changes the flavor that much, but other people definitely report more flavor change. Russula brevipes, the host for this mushroom, is also edible. So the fungus that grows on it is actually pretty particular about which mushrooms it will use as a host. So it doesn't grow on anything that is dangerous to you. If you go really far north in the Pacific Northwest, like in Alaska, it does actually grow on a species of Lactarius, Lactarius torminosus. But that one is not a desirable edible, but if you ate it cooked, it would be okay. But if you ate it raw, it might make you sick. However, it doesn't matter. Once it's parasitized by this other fungus, it completely transforms it into a different thing, and they are fine to eat. And Diana says, when are they in season? I'm a newbie. So these are some that I see starting to pop up in late summer, and then they will go through the fall. They start to get they go downhill a lot when they're not very fresh. So you want to make sure that you get ones that are really nice and young and firm and not starting to get too squishy. I see Nathan says, I found some last weekend, well past prime. Thank you for the update. Okay. Here's a pretty easy one if you're looking for edibles. If you find something that looks just like this, there's really nothing that you can really mistake it for. Like if it looks like egg noodles, a mass of wavy egg noodles, you've got this, the cauliflower mushroom. It's kind of unfortunate that they called it the cauliflower mushroom because there are white coral mushrooms that I think look more like cauliflower than this particular one does. But I don't know, those aren't really dangerous anyway, but oh, my cat is right here. So you all want to say hi. This is Vera. She wants dinner. Hi. Okay. And this is this is a choice edible mushroom, so it has no poisonous lookalikes to it. The only thing that you could potentially mistake for it is some white coral mushrooms, and I'll show you in a bit what some of those coral mushrooms look like. Okay, and then there's chicken of the woods, Laetiparus conifericola. There's also one that grows on hardwoods, so conifericola means growing on conifers. And the one that grows on hardwoods in the area is usually growing on cherry and plum trees, and it's Laetiparus gilbertsonii. But anyway, they're both chicken of the woods. And they are pretty easy for beginner mushrooms because they're super bright yellow and super bright orange, like neon. They start growing in the summer and then they will grow through the fall. The ones that I've been seeing at this point are looking in kind of sad shape, but depending on where you find them, maybe you could still find some fresh ones. And they have very tiny, small pores that almost just looks like a flat surface that doesn't have pores. So that is going to help you to tell it apart from this thing, Pycnoparellus Fulgens. And I saw a lot of these, especially in the summer. And it's really the only thing that I can think of that people are likely to mistake for chicken of the woods, because it still has that bright orange and kind of yellowish color. However, the pores that are on the underside are going to be larger. And here's the real telltale is it has this kind of fuzz that's on the top of the cap. Your chicken of the woods is not going to have any of that fuzzy stuff on top. So if you find a chicken of the woods that's fuzzy, it's probably something else. Okay.
Leah, can we go back for a second to the lobster? There was a question from Aaron. He was asking can you eat the lobsters if they are covered in such white spores?
Yes.
And yes, it's also my answer. I have eaten them and it didn't do anything bad. And in case anybody finds a lobster which is not prime anymore, save it please for Kirsten, because I want it for dyeing my wool. So if you don't want to eat it, save it anyway.
Yeah, and do you particularly want ones that have some reddish color to them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
So
they
really,
can be mushy, they can be covered in whatever other stuff, doesn't matter.
okay. Yep. So yeah, these do produce a lot of white spores that will be coming out of them that sometimes can look like it's moldy, but it's really just dropping a whole bunch of spores from it. And you can also find lobster mushrooms that are part white. Those are still fine to eat. They're either partially parasitized or just haven't developed as much of that orange color, but they're still fine to eat.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, and remember I said with the cauliflower mushroom, there would be some coral mushrooms that could potentially look similar. So coral mushrooms are things that look like this. They have branches that come up from the ground. They are generally growing on the ground, and they generally branch in a lot of different directions. So they're called coral because they look like corals from under the sea. As far as being edible, most of these are edible. However, they can be very difficult to tell apart from each other. In the springtime in the Pacific Northwest, you can basically eat all of them because not that many of them come up and they're like big chunky things that are hard to mistake for anything else. It's only like, I don't know, 6 or 7 species that come up. In the fall, there are quite a few more species that will pop up and they can be difficult to tell apart from each other. Something like this red one wouldn't be as hard, but there's a lot of them that are kind of yellow or orangish. And the longer they stay out in the weather, the more they turn kind of a beige color. So even something that starts out red can just turn kind of beige tan, and they kind of all look the same over time. If you do want to experiment with eating them, I would not recommend eating ones that have any gelatinous kind of gooey stuff on the inside, ones that stain darkly. But probably the worst thing that would happen to you from eating any sort of coral mushrooms is that it would either not taste good, or you could get some diarrhea from it. But none of them are so poisonous that they're going to kill you or anything.
I just found such a wonderful pink one for the first time, and it was quite big, and I thought like, okay, that's the one I will try, and I did, and here I am, I'm still living.
Nothing bad happened?
Nope, nothing bad happened.
Was it good?
It was actually pretty good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've had mixed results eating corals. I've never had any gastrointestinal problems, but some of them have kind of a weird piney taste that I don't like very much. And some of them are really good. There's a couple that have reddish tips that grow in the spring that I really enjoy, and they have kind of a nutty flavor.
Mhm.
And then there's the yellow ones that come up in spring. I'm like, ooh, this tastes like eating pine trees. It's a bit weird.
Mhm.
But
These
some
are
people really like it, so maybe you will.
edible but forgettable.
Yeah. Okay, here's the Lactarius deliciosus group. These are, so Lactarius as a genus are mushrooms that when you cut the gills on them, some liquid will seep out of it. So a latex or a milk. So it's called Lactarius because it lactates. This particular species of Lactarius doesn't actually give off very much milk, but this orangish color here is the orange milk that comes out of it. And as you can see, it's been cut right here, and there's a little bit of that orange that's seeping out. This species also develops these kind of bluish green stains where it has been damaged or exposed over time. And so if you have that combination of features, this orange mushroom, especially with a zonate cap. So zonate means there are these different concentric rings, these zones of material. So that oftentimes Lactarius have zonate caps like that, but they're all going to let off some sort of milky stuff when you break the gills. So this particular one has orange milk coming out of it, an orange cap, and it develops these bluish green spots on it. Other Lactarius will have different colors milk, different color caps, or they won't have these bluish stains on them. Lactarius in general are pretty safe to eat. There's a few that would be very bad tasting or might make you sick, especially if you go elsewhere in the world. Lee asks, oh, okay, so let's see. John says, how do you like to prepare them? I don't actually, they're not my favorite. Does anybody else maybe have a way that they like to prepare them? I feel like they have kind of a smoky, earthy flavor that I'm not really into. But I know that some people really enjoy them, so maybe somebody else could give you a good idea. And Lee asks, does the milk come up when they're drier? So yeah, that's a really good point. When you have very dry weather, especially like we have up until recently, the Lactarius are less likely to give off as much milk. And sometimes even when you know it's a Lactarius, you'll have a little bit of a hard time getting some milk out of them. But when they're pretty wet, they tend to put it out more reliably. And some species give off more milk than others as well. Okay, so here is Amanita Muscaria, your fly agaric or your Mario mushroom. They're really like iconic mushroom. There are different varieties of them. In the Pacific Northwest, they usually start out kind of reddish, and then as they open up, the edges fade to a lighter color that's yellow to orange on the outside, and then they usually stay kind of darker on the inside. It's kind of unmistakable. You're not really going to find anything else that looks quite like that in the Pacific Northwest. They do have these concentric rings of vulva at the base. So right here, you see there's this tissue. It's got these warts on the cap. So this one is on the left is a little bit older than the one on the right. And when you get these really small in the button form, those bits of tissue are fused together, and then the stipe becomes bigger and it breaks apart. So these little bits that are making warts on the top of the cap are actually the same sort of flesh called the universal veil. So that's material that goes around the entire mushroom when it's in the very smallest button form. And in this case, it makes these concentric rings of vulva at the base also. And for Amanita ID, exactly what that vulva looks like, what shape it takes, if it's kind of sac-like, or if it has concentric rings, or if it's more like a collar, that's really going to be important for your ID. But with this particular color and these concentric rings, there's really nothing else in the Pacific Northwest that it's going to be. Some people do eat these for various reasons. It does have psychoactive effects, but it's not going to be the same as like your regular magic mushrooms. It's a dissociative. It can make people sick. Some people do enjoy the feelings that they get from it, but it can be a wild ride that you are not potentially not what you might be expecting. That said, it can also be eaten as just an edible mushroom without any of those psychoactive effects. And the way that you do that is to boil it in 2 changes of water, quite a lot of water, and discard the water each time because the toxins that are in it go into the water. And then you can eat it just like a regular mushroom, which I have done, and it's quite good. You just want to make sure to boil it in plenty of water so that those things are all removed.
Does it not disintegrate if you boil it that much?
No, surprisingly, it holds its form pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a friend who made mushroom ceviche out of them that was quite good. So that's like, for folks who don't know, that's a fish dish with lime and lime, cilantro, and onion, and you could put a white fish in it. And so in this case, it had Amanita Muscaria instead of the white fish.
Interesting.
Okay, but if you are looking for magic mushrooms, these are what some of them look like. This is Psilocybe cyanescens, also known as wavy caps. So you will see them in wood chips especially. I have only seen them in urban wood chips. I've never seen them in a forested setting personally. They have dark purple brown spores that you can see here on the overlapping caps. And when you touch them and hold on to them for a couple of minutes, there will be blue bruising that occurs. You can see maybe a little bit of that right in here. But this particular color of cap and the waviness and the growth in wood chips with a white stipe are all things that'll help you to key in on it with that blue bruising. Okay, there's also Psilocybe azurescens. Those ones tend to grow a bit farther north, and they grow primarily in dune grasses on the coast. And instead of having the wavy cap, they have kind of a UFO shaped cap. But again, they have that same caramel colored cap. They have those dark purple brown, almost black spores, white stipe, and they bruise blue. You do want to make sure, if you are looking for those, that you do not accidentally mistake it for the deadly Gallerina Marginata. These usually grow on full-on logs, but sometimes you can also see them in wood chips as well, and they could potentially even be growing intermixed with the magic mushrooms. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. These do contain amatoxins, which can destroy your organs. So definitely don't make sure to not make that mistake. If we look back on these, they have more or less white stipes, okay? And they have these dark colored spores, whereas these have brownish stipes generally. They have usually a more well-formed ring on the stipe, and they have rusty brown spores. They're not nearly as darkly spored as the Psilocybe species are. And they do not stain blue, although I have seen plenty of people convince themselves that they're holding something that stains blue, even when it definitely doesn't. Here's Coordinarius Violatious. It's a beautiful, large purple mushroom. I like to call it the Muppet Coordinarius because it has this fuzzy purple top to it, and it has rusty brown spores. You can see them developing here on the stipe, and they dropped from the gills. You can also see them developing right on the edge here. You can eat this. It doesn't taste very good, so it's usually just for novelty. You do it once and then you don't eat it anymore because it doesn't taste that good. There are a couple of other, actually many other Coordinarius that have some purple on them, but none of them are as dark and furry as this one is. So Lee asks, is that orange normal? This is maybe the person highlighted the photo a little bit. It is rusty brown spores that come out. They're not quite orange, but they are a rusty brown color, so that is normal. Here's Helvella vespertina. Sometimes these are called elfin saddles because they're part of a group of mushrooms, some of which are shaped like tiny saddles, like an elf could ride them. This one is like more irregular. They grow on the ground. They don't have gills or pores or anything on them. The spores actually come out of the top of these rather than the bottom. And these are considered edible when they are cooked. They may have a very small amount of a carcinogen in them. So some people don't recommend them or don't want to eat them. However, that carcinogen is probably in a very small quantity and is probably cooked all out when they're cooked at all. So I eat them and like them. I think they taste like bacon, but I'm a vegetarian, so my concept of bacon might be a little bit different than yours. And there are hedgehog mushrooms. These are choice edible mushrooms. They have, if you've had the candy circus peanuts, they kind of look like that on top. They're that color. But their key feature is that they have these spines that are coming out of the bottom of the mushroom. And so they don't have gills or pores, they have spines instead. They have kind of a sweet flavor when they're cooked, which leads to the other common name, which is sweet tooth. And I highly recommend them. Even though they have spines on the bottom, they're actually pretty closely related to chanterelles. And then there's also a smaller version of the hedgehog mushroom, and it has a little belly button inside, but it still has these spines on it. Oyster mushrooms are good edibles that can grow basically any season as long as it's not freezing. So you will find them on logs, especially logs of broadleaf trees, although they occasionally grow on conifers as well. And you can use them in practically anything. They have a fairly mild flavor. And they have white spores, and they often will, but not always, will have a little bit of stipe on them. And here's something that you could potentially mistake them for, the angel wings. So angel wings look an awful lot like oysters, except for they have thinner flesh. Their flesh is always white. The caps are completely white, whereas the oysters will sometimes have kind of a pinkish tint to them, or even be brown or tan. Oysters can come in a lot of different colors. They both have white spores. The angel wings tend to have kind of a curled in margin like these do, and they grow strictly on conifers. So that very thin flesh, that growth on conifers, and they don't have any stipe. They both of these species do have gills that kind of run down all the way, although on the oysters it may stop short of being all the way down. And as far as the angel wings being edible, they are edible with a huge caveat. It seems like people in North America are eating them without problems. However, in Japan, especially in this 1 year, there are some people that died from eating angel wings. It was a particularly good mushroom year, so there was huge flushes of these, and people were eating large quantities at a time. And these people were all older and had pre-existing kidney problems, like they were on dialysis. And then they got so sick that they ended up dying and having some organ issues with these. So if you are older and you have kidney issues, I would not recommend overindulging or indulging in these at all. So that is the one caveat on those, pretty big caveat. I do eat them occasionally, but I find that they don't have actually that much flavor, and I prefer the oysters that look like this better. Okay, here's one more thing that might be mistaken for oyster mushrooms, Crepidotus. And rather than having white spores, these have brown spores. And then as long as they're fresh, they often have a little bit of this kind of furry brownish stuff on the top, so you can tell that apart. I've talked to a few people who have accidentally eaten these thinking that they were oysters, and nothing bad happened to them. That's as much as we know as far as edibility goes. Here's a matsutake. This is another choice edible mushroom. You can tell it mostly because of its smell. Once you smell the matsutake, you will know it for life. It has this smell that is like red hot cinnamon candy. David Aurora of All That the Rain Promises and More, that great beginner book, says that it smells like a combination between Red Hot's candy and dirty gym socks. I mostly get the Red Hot's candy smell, not so much the dirty gym sock smell. It has this ring that sheaths from the bottom. When you dig them up, they have this kind of ashy stuff that's at the base. And they have this little snakeskin texture above the ring. And the gills are attached. There's either like a little notch that comes out of them, or they more or less go straight across. There is another lookalike that will have gills that are decurrent. And so they run down the stipe like this rather than stopping abruptly at the stipe. That one is called Cataphilasma, and you can eat that one too, but it's very rubbery and tastes kind of like cucumbers. So I'm not a huge fan. Where are they found? I usually find them at higher elevations, growing with certain kinds of pines. You can also find them with some older growth Doug firs, but they do especially like to grow with pine, or you can find them in coastal areas growing with pine. If you have heard of the plant, it's called candy stick is the common name for it, or Allotropa variegata. It is a mycoheterotrophic plant, which means that it relies on fungi for nutrition. If you see this plant in the summer that looks like a candy cane and it has no green parts, that is associated exclusively with the matsutake mushroom. So if you see that in the summer, you can come back in the fall and you might be able to find matsutakes there. And I will write the name of that in the chat if you want to check out the plant, Allotropa variegata, or candy stick. Okay, it's in the chat. Okay. Here's the Cataphilasma, the thing that kind of looks like it. And if you look at the stipe base on this one, it has dirt on it rather than that ashy stuff. And the gills are decurrent rather than stopping right abruptly at the stipe like this. Here's one that you definitely want to watch out for, though. There are people who have been picking these in recent years, thinking that they are matsutakes, and they get severely poisoned, and there's even risk of death from consuming them. Amanita Smithiana. I did actually smell one of these the other day, and it had kind of a sweet smell that I can imagine if I was looking for matsutake and didn't really know, I could trick myself into believing was the right smell. It doesn't really smell like it, though, once you know that matsutake smell. This doesn't have that really substantial ring on the stipe like this one does. And it also has, notice the stipe base on the matsutake versus the Amanita Smithiana. They're generally bulbous. See, this one's a little bit less bulbous, but if we go back on the matsutake, it's more or less equal on the base, maybe a little bit tapering. It's not bulbous on the base. So those are some of the things that are going to help you to differentiate the two. So do not go eating these Amanitas. You could potentially die. This one doesn't have anything about it that you're going to eat it or anything, but you will often see just these like fruitings by the hundreds of Xeromphylinas. Really bright orange mushroom with decurrent gills growing on wood. They're maybe the size of a penny, pretty small, and just very pretty. We're wrapping up here, and then we'll do a little bit of show and tell. And here is our last species for the day. Bear's head, or sometimes I see it as boar's head, Hericium abiates. If y'all are familiar with the lion's mane, that's in the same genus as this, and they are both delicious edibles. They grow on wood and their spines are hanging down. Remember, we saw the coral mushrooms earlier. Those are kind of similar, but they grow on the ground and they have branches that point upward rather than the spines here that are hanging down and growing on wood. If you find a spot that has it, You can check it year after year. It will occur there in the same spot as long as the conditions are right for fruiting and there's still enough wood for it to eat. And one thing I really like to do with these, if I'm lucky enough to find them, is to make mock crab cakes out of them. That's definitely my favorite way to have them. They have a great crab-like texture. And I mostly find these at higher elevations in areas that have true firs, especially old growth kind of areas with a lot of downed large wood. Okay, and with that, I will take questions, and we can also start going over your mushrooms that you found.
Hey, Kirsten, do you want to, first of all, thank you, Leah. That was super.
Very nice.
That was very helpful and informative, and I liked it, and it's exciting to be getting back out there and looking for mushrooms again after a very long dry period.
Yeah.
So I'll turn it over to Kirsten first to show some mushrooms that she found recently, and then I've typed some things in the chat. So if you have mushrooms, for everybody on the meeting, if you have a mushroom that you've found recently and would like us to take a look at, I'll spotlight you so that your mushroom can be shown big on the screen, and we'll try to figure out what it is. And then also, I think Leah has another mushroom that she might like to show to you, but we'll start with Kirsten first. So let me go ahead and spotlight Kirsten.
All right. So the first thing what I want to show is a couple chanterelles. Can you see this? And they are not brand new. They were in my fridge for a couple days. And I also would like to say this season, we don't have a super abundance of chanterelles. I mean, I used to go like last year still, you go and I got tons and tons in one foray. This year is much less, so don't be discouraged if you don't find that many. This year is kind of a weird year. Maybe it will still change. I mean, they are out there, but it's not as abundant as we used to. Anyway, I want to show the gills. See that?
Yeah.
The folds, kind of. And what really works great, if you pull the thing and rip it apart like this. See that? This is a very distinct feature of chanterelles. The other mushrooms will not do that. I mean, that's also what Leah kind of mentioned. They can look different, but yeah, so that's really different kind of types, but I'm sure this is the mushroom everybody as a newbie wants to find mostly because it's the easiest, or we usually had the biggest abundance of those. So then I was this morning out with some folks and we found lots and lots of those beautiful oysters. I hold this also closer, see that? And the under, and they grow in such clusters. And you see a little bit of those stipes. Whoops, I put this down. A little bit, yeah, can you see that? Tiny bit. It's not totally like the angel wings don't have that. Here is a tiny one. You see a tiny little bit of a stipe on it. And the oysters, they are really delicious. If you find too many, you can also dry them. So it's really cool. Then another one, which Leah didn't show, this is the shaggy parasol. So that thing is also relatively often. And a very distinct feature is if you scratch it, it turns orange. So maybe this one, see that, kind of. It looks more brownish. It looks in reality really orange. And it has also a very nice veil. So you can see that as a distinct thing. Here's another one. And they grow usually in big clumps, or no, maybe clump is not the right word, but you have not only one, you have lots of them together. So if you see one, just simply stop, look all around, and you will find more. There's usually 1, 2, 3, or 10 more. And this is also one which has still completely closed head. So you see the veil is not visible yet totally. I mean, you see it, but it's still all closed up. So this is totally fresh. This is the best state that I like them. And see all the cool mycelium, what we learned from the last one, going to the mother tree. Super cool. Anyway, so then we have those guys. One of my other favorites, which are also a form of bolete. Those are birch bullets, and you can find them wherever there are birches. It's really totally associated with the birch. It looks a little bit like a birch stem because it's like black and white, and you see the underneath thing, no gills. It's a spongy area, and when they are fresh, it is very white, like this one. See the sponge? If they are older, the sponge turns grayish, brownish, much darker. I have another one. Is this one? Yeah, then it looks like this. See that? But it's still good. And this one shows kind of a weird orange stain. Doesn't matter. Sometimes they also stain blue for me. I have eaten them all and I like them. And what I also mainly do with them, here's a couple really cute ones, tiny, but still so cute. What I do with them, if I find too many, I dry them. And they really give off this super nice, I mean, their whole aroma gets kind of concentrated in the dried form. And then you can add them to whatever kind of sauces. If you have meat dishes or veggie dishes, you put them in. If there is some liquid, then the mushroom hydrates again and gives this beautiful, nice mushroom flavor to your dish. And so this is what I love. And maybe some people remember, like 2 years ago, as we had a show at Olympic College, we had this kind of mushroom soup, which the students did for us. And that was actually made out of birch bullets, and everybody loved it. So I like it very much. So what else do we have? Oh yeah, those guys, let's see this, to show one of the poisonous one, which like this is the less common but still interesting looking Amanita Muscaria, not the red color, but such a kind of weird brownish, but you see all the spots on there exactly like the red and white dot Muscaria. And on this one, I would say you do not see any vulva. It's like totally not visible, although I tried to really get it out of the ground. This one shows it a little bit better. But anyway, so, okay. And Leah said, if I boil them really good for 2 water baths, then I can eat them. So maybe I will try that. Anyway, another little thing, which is just too cute, is this. It's called witch's butter. This is also supposed to be edible. I have not tried it because it is totally mushy, gelatinous, and probably 80% water. So if you would fry this up, there's nothing in your pan. But anyway, it looks kind of cute. And what else did I find? Oh, yeah, those guys. That's the last one. So they are also having a sponge underneath, but much more open. It's not like the Bullets. So this one I would guess, but Leah can tell me it's a Zoilus. And I think it's like the duck for Zoilus, which is cerulescens, but I'm not sure. But I am sure that you can eat them because I have, and I do all the time. So, and they are quite common. So
Yeah, looks like Zoilus cerulescens.
yeah, okay. So yeah, and yeah, sometimes they also, yeah, you have like 20 of them at the same spot. So if you find them and you have no other mushroom, why not take those? Yeah. And last but not least, look at this beautiful thing. Anybody knows what that is?
Everybody else is on mute.
Everybody is on mute. Okay. I will tell you, this is also a oyster mushroom. You will not find that in the woods, but you will find them in some Asian markets. So this is pretty much the only mushroom I'm buying if I am running out of mushrooms to eat, because you've got to have your daily mushroom in your meal, right? So this one is super delicious, and I would like to compare it to the Edulus, because if you cut the stem, I mean, first of all, it's super solid. It is really totally comparable to meat. It's the most meaty mushroom I can think of. And if you cut it, you know, like little round pieces, they look like scallops in your pan, and it tastes super delicious. So I guess now everybody will run to all the Asian markets and buy them, and this is not really good because I love it and I want it. Anyway, all right, so this was my show and tell. Now, if some other people have mushrooms which they would like us to look at. And
I have a couple that people might find interesting.
okay.
I showed the hold on, let me I don't have the greatest lighting in here, but you know, I already showed this Amanita Muscaria or the death cap. That's a little too bright, huh? Anyways, the caps get really this kind of olive brown color when they are mature. They have white gills, and when they're really young, they can be really kind of white with this opaque greenish color, and then they burst out of this sac-like vulva, and they only associate with European hardwoods, and I guess they have been found in British Columbia to be like associating with some native live or Gary oak, but pretty much you're only going to find them in like urban settings. You're not going to find them out in the forest and stuff. And so a lot of people go, oh, is that a death cap? Is that a death cap? And they're not that common here on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of an exciting one to me. And then I don't want to get it mixed up with these ones, but here is a beautiful Bolitas Edulus, also known as the porcini or the penny bun or the sep or whatever Kirsten called it.
Steinpilz.
Steinpilz. I don't know.
Steinpilz, because they are solid like a rock. Stein is the word for rock. So they are really, and that's what I meant also with this one, you know, they are so solid. They have this beautiful structure. If you cook them in a pan, they don't fall apart. They don't get a messy, mushy thing. It's still a solid piece, which has it's most likely to be compared with meat, in my opinion. Yeah.
Very dense. This is my favorite mushroom.
Yeah.
To find and to eat. And I find these, I swear I had my eyes on the ground for 20 years before I found a patch of these that reoccur. And they're growing in a grove of like hemlock and pine. And so it's hard for me to know what you know, where is the mycorrhizal relationship? I don't know if it's the hemlocks or the pines or what, but having Leah say that they grow with pine down there, it makes me think more and more, because honestly, it's like cedar trees up here, cedar and pine. I just don't seem to find a lot of mushrooms growing with those, but this might be one of the exceptions. And so this was a beauty, and there was a few others with it, and they really can hide. There's a lot of salal growing around there, and so the salal leaves on the ground when they're decaying and turning brown can look just like this cap. So I actually walked past this, and I'd just about given up, and I went the other direction, and it caught my eye, and I was like, oh, there we are, you know. So I got about 4 of them out of there, and every year they come back. They're mycorrhizal, so they'll just keep growing in relationship with those trees, which is pretty cool. And then this year I found my first, these are Bolitas borosii or Bolitas borosi, white kings. And so you can see underneath it, it's got the white pore surface, really stuffed pores, just like on the porcini. But these are actually growing under a copper beech tree near a grocery store near my house, like in a landscaping island. And a friend of mine sent me a picture late at night one night, and he goes, look at these, and he showed me the underneath, and I jumped in my truck and I raced out there, and these things were growing in like a huge cluster. Unlike the Bolitas Edulus, I usually find, you know, I'll find several of these in the same patch, but never clustered tight together like these are. And I probably pulled like 40 of these about this size out of this one patch, and they flushed twice this year. And I gave a bunch to my mom, and she's just like, oh my gosh, those are the best mushrooms ever. So yeah. I'm not going to tell y'all which grocery store, but I'm going back there every year.
I will now check every grocery store close to your house. That is very clear.
white king. So these are just as hard as the porcinis, and they actually stain a little bit yellow on the bottom when you cut them, or when they're bruised a little bit. But they also, just like this, has that reticulation that Leah was talking about. It's like netting. It looks like netting on the stipe. And this has the same thing, but really fine. You got to really look pretty close. But I think these are my new favorite mushroom, the white king, the Bolitas borosii. So that's my show and tell for this group.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
All right, who's next? Let's see.
Lee, okay.
Nathan.
Nathan.
Nathan, I think you can unmute. Let's see.
Yeah, let me, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let me switch cameras here. So I don't have any of these right now. Looks like they came up in October of 2019. This is a patch in my father-in-law's backyard. So this is a view of the pore surface.
Okay.
And then there's the top of the cap. I took, oh, that's really badly out of focus, but it kind of started to bruise, or not really, yeah, I guess bruise, kind of a reddish color.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a cross section, and there's a huge patch of these. They're about the size of maybe like a baseball or a softball was the largest. There's the very base of the stipe. No, I guess that's back to it. And then I looked under the microscope. Let's see, do I have it? No, I don't have it there. I think it was under photos. Was it November?
Kirsten, do you know what that mushroom is?
I'm guessing I'm seeing.
I have similar, and
Okay.
it's not a Zeller's, and it's probably a Zulus of some kind, maybe Leah knows. But what I do know is they're really good for eating.
So it's a zero Comelis, it looks like.
Okay.
And so they have kind of usually kind of dryish caps on them, and it looks like yours has the cracking caps on them, and we used to call those Bolitas crescenteron or the red
Exactly.
cracking boletes, but they've now
That's
that's a
what I was
European
thinking.
species and it's been renamed and it's called Xerocomelus diffractus, but you know, the mushroom is the same. It looks
Okay.
like you have a Xerocomelus too. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same one as Kirsten has, but it's edible in the same way.
Yeah.
I know this one didn't have any of the really distinct cracking on the cap in any of the ones that I found out there. And it's a huge patch. It's like
Yeah.
30, 40 of them.
But look,
Just
this
to go
one
along.
doesn't have the cracking either, while
Okay.
this one does. And they
Oh,
grew
okay.
next to each other.
So
So
there's some like variation then.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And
But also some of them just don't crack and they look very similar.
yeah.
Okay.
There's many different Xerocomelus in the area that look very similar to each other,
Okay.
and you can eat all of them.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Oh, Tina, I think you can unmute, and if you have photos.
Well, okay, there we go. Well, I have my camera. Can you see that?
Let's see.
You have to hold it up closer, and you probably need to maybe talk while you do it so we focus on you.
Oh,
Nope, that's not
Keep
visible.
talking. Just
hi.
keep talking.
So I got a Foliota Scorosa.
Okay. Yep.
There, got it?
That's
Foliota.
fine. Your phone turned off.
Oh, shoot. Hold on a second. Too long. All right. Foliota Scorosa.
Yep.
And that's, here, let me go to the next one. And it actually, let's see if I can get that to come in focus there. That's them when they open up. And then I shared these on the members page as well. But I also got local, I did some urban foraging and got some Birch Bullets, the Alexinum scabrum. So
Tina, David asked, how do you distinguish those from the honey mushrooms?
I don't know. I think that they're spikier.
Yes, they have spikes and honey mushrooms do not.
And they're whiter. The honey mushrooms are more brown.
Okay.
Yeah, they're much scalier than the honey mushrooms are,
Yeah.
and the scales are more erect. And the Foliota also has brown spores, whereas the honey mushrooms have white spores.
Cool.
And I was looking and I got a few different things on edibility. Some said they're edible, some said they're not. None of them said they were good. But they were fun to look at.
Anybody else have a mushroom they want to show? Because we got
I
a
see
question.
Lee waving a hand.
Oh, Lee. Tom, then we'll get to you next.
Okay, can people hear me?
Yes.
Are they seeing me? Okay, this one is a very common mushroom. The reason I'm showing it is because I found trying to identify it very difficult. It has no gills. Here's another example. There are no gills. It is very rubbery, very tough, and it's growing on wood. So my real question here is, what the heck am I looking at?
I have exactly the same, and I learned that one
That's it.
recently because I also tried to get it, and I had some nice help. Yeah, and that has this
That's it.
weird under thing, white dark stem, and I learned it's a stalked polypore of the Cereoporus group.
And so it, okay, so
Leah, do you have anything to say to that?
Yeah, so I think that it's been reclassified and it's now a Pycnoparellus, but the black-footed polypore is the common name for
Okay,
it.
yeah.
And there's actually more than one mushroom that basically fits that description. And they have more or less black on their feet, and their caps can be slightly different colors, but there are a bunch of them that have those black feet that I just call black-footed polypore
Yeah.
group.
Okay. All
What was
right.
the Latin name?
Yes, I will write it in the chat. It's Kitsap Badius.
I
Would
have
never guessed that.
Okay.
I have another mushroom. This is very tiny. It has, of course, no gills. It has no, it has little,
Hold it up a little higher, Lee.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's a little softball. Yeah.
it doesn't have, of course, have a vulva. It doesn't have a ring. It has like this, it is 1 day old. It has, it's not hard per se, but they could be considered a little bit spiny. What the heck is this thing? And is it even a mushroom or a flower? Man, I'm confused.
It's a puffball.
Yeah.
It's a
It's a
puffball.
puff.
And
Yes.
if you take a knife and you cut it in half,
Yeah,
inside,
yeah,
it's completely solid. And if
yes,
it's still young enough, it should be white.
yes,
then-
it is. It
yeah.
is white
And
inside.
it's beautiful and it's edible. If it's older, this white stuff, which is the spore medium, will turn yellowish, brownish, really ugly until, and puffball it's called because if they do get a little bit old and you step on them, then they explode and make all their spores come out in a cloud of almost like a dusty cloud.
Okay,
And Leah can maybe tell us exactly which puffball it is.
Yeah, it's probably Lycopterodon perlatum, which is a gem-studded puffball, referring to the little kind of spiny bits that are on the top.
Okay.
And you can eat them. There's lots of different kinds of puffballs, and you can eat all of them,
Yeah.
as
Okay.
long as they're actually puffballs and not earth balls or amanitas that are still inside of the egg.
Yeah.
okay, okay.
And as long as they haven't turned into spores already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a picture here of some of the older ones I found.
Okay, I have one other thing that I don't even know if it's a mushroom. I'm going to show it to you first from the camera. It is, then I will show it to you real. It is 1 day old. It looks like a triple pancake. This is the thing itself.
Yes.
It is very quickly. It could be a Bolitas. It has
No.
a very spongy underlayer. It was growing on the ground, not on the tree.
You're good at describing this stuff. I got it.
I am, and it has, I dug it out of the ground fairly carefully. So I don't know that there's any stalk. I don't think there's any vulva. I don't know what the hell this thing, I can't even begin to.
Paniolus.
You
Why
you
I
have a
love
dire
that you
spine
actually
cord there.
show all the things you learned tonight. You would say no vulva and could be a Bolitas. And so this, I really love that you kind of learned that all. So,
Right, right.
Kirsten, tell everybody what that is.
well, I would say it did grow on wood. You just did not see that wood because
Right.
it's in the ground. And it is often so decayed that it is hard to tell. And I am not totally sure what it is, but it is definitely not a bolete because it doesn't have a sponge. It, the surface of such a, I want to say tree mushroom or the polypore is Yeah, the name polypore says many pores. It's just tiny little pore thingies. It's
Right.
not a sponge. You cannot push it in. It's a solid thing. I have here another one.
It
which
can,
also, no, this is
Nope.
maybe, but it also has this, you know, it has tiny little holes, pores.
no, this one, it is spongy and it can be pushed in. And it really was found, of course, it was found very clearly on the ground. Now, of course, there could have been roots underneath,
Yeah.
but it is like a sponge.
Although you can press on it, it's if you have a bolete in comparison,
It's-
those
Yes.
are much squishier than that, and you could just completely flatten them between your fingers.
Okay, so what is this thing again?
So this one is called the dyer's polypore.
Yes.
It's a mushroom that you can use to dye fabric, and it makes lots of different colors, anywhere from yellow to kind of other golden colors to brownish. And it
Okay.
can look very different depending on where it's at in its development.
Okay,
And it's a parasite of conifers, and it grows on their roots. So you find them at the base of trees, but it's ultimately attached to the roots of the trees.
there were trees everywhere. Here is one more thing that you probably all know what it is.
Before you go away with that, John, if you'll focus on my
Yeah.
picture,
Ooh,
here
that
is a very young Dyer's polypore.
That's,
It's all squishy and very, very full of juice. You know, it's very young. The Dyer's polypore, I found a tree in the forest near my house that is and that's probably a side view of it. But you can see it sitting up on a stalk, and it has pores underneath and a very, very young looking tender growth on the top. But as it grows, it makes more of a dish and becomes much harder. This particular one is only about 5 inches in diameter at the moment, but when it grows to be fully formed in the like you see most examples, it will grow to be 10 inches, 12 inches around with several layers on top.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. I'm gonna mute everybody right now and give a public service announcement. Hopefully you can all hear me. So we've heard a lot of things today from Kirsten and Leah. And then Lee brought up a very important point, which was she started off by talking about how that mushroom was not growing on wood. It was probably growing in soil. And I think that's really hard, because I suspect that what was going on there was that it was an old rotting log that was buried in the dirt. And so we talk about these things. There's mushrooms where if it's growing in soil, it's a choice edible. And if it's growing on wood, it's poisonous. And so all of the things that we're talking about here tonight, you need to be careful. You don't need to be afraid, but you need to be careful. And there's a lot of experts that can make very informed decisions about whether something is edible or isn't, and they can know that the worst it could be is a little stomach indigestion and they can eat things. But I would highly recommend that you make sure you have a positive ID on the mushroom before you eat it. And that usually means looking at a lot of different mushrooms for a while, and for picking some of the easier ones that are easy to identify and starting there, and work your way up to tasting things that probably are okay. So I will stop there. But Lee, thank you. That was fantastic. And I do like the way that you're out there grabbing the mushrooms and able to tell exactly what you're seeing. And that is really important. That's how you get to be a good identifier, as you can look at a mushroom and actually see it and know whether it's growing in soil and how big the stipe is and whether it's spongy or not. And then just one of the other tricky things is we talk about polypores being not so squishy, but that's a very relative term. And if you find a slightly rotten one, it may be squishy. If you find a young one, it may be squishy. And so it's important to know where a mushroom is in the life cycle. And the easiest way to do that is to look at a lot of mushrooms and see, oh, this one looks like that one, but maybe it's older or maybe it's younger. So, so I will do just give all that and stop there because I love the excitement that's going on now. And now I want to quickly talk about forays. We had a couple questions early on about from different people saying, hey, I've been out in near Bremerton, or I've been out in Kitsap and I've been looking for mushrooms. And I mean, it's not even like a question about what is this mushroom? Like, it seems like there's no mushrooms out there. And I will say that that is more true than in any year I can remember in the past 20 years. So I would say this is a really tricky year to be out there looking for mushrooms. And if you have talked to people who have told you, oh yeah, just go out in pretty much any woods in Kitsap County and you will find chanterelles, just look for the orange mushrooms. You can't miss them. That's been true in some years, like you would find them everywhere. It's not true this year. I don't know why it is, but I will say it seems to me, it used to be much more common that in the fall in Kitsap, we would get a drizzle of rain that would cover the entire county, if not the whole western half of the state. Like, there wasn't that much difference in rainfall from one area to the next. And I feel now like there are areas that are getting rainstorms and mushrooms are coming up there, and there are still areas that are very dry. And so it's much more hit or miss and much more challenging, which can be good because it makes it more fun to go out there and find things. But I bring this up because it makes it very challenging, on top of some of the other challenges that we're facing related to the pandemic, to schedule and lead forays. Because usually by this time of year, we're maybe 6 weeks into kind of foray season, where any club member who's picked chanterelles before is comfortable taking people out to somewhere in Kitsap County and pretty sure that they'll find at least one or two, and that people will get enough to have a meal and they can be positively identified. And this year, man, there's places that I have found chanterelles almost every year that I've been here that there are none there right now. And so we have a number of people who are ready and willing to lead forays, and we just don't know where the mushrooms are yet, or if they're going to come up this year. And then secondly, this has been happening over time. This isn't surprising to anybody, but there's still a lot of logging going on in Kitsap County and the heritage parks, and a number of foray leaders from the club have taken people out to their favorite chanterelle patch to show people how to identify mushrooms and identify habitat, and found clear cut instead. And so that leads the foray leaders to think, oh, you know what, I actually need to go out and scout an area now before I take people out there, because things are changing. So it takes the foray leaders more time to make sure not only were there mushrooms there last year, but that they're there this year, that there's still trees there this year. And then we add on top of that, we used to be able to just say 20 people, 30 people, we'll get 3 foray leaders, we'll all carpool, we can do this. Now we're trying to do things socially distanced. So some foray leaders, want smaller groups, which is great. Some members want smaller groups. And so it means more administrative time to figure out when we're going to go and how we're going to make sure who can go and that they pre-register and so on. So we are working through all of those challenges now, but it does seem like we're getting more and more rain. And if the freezing weather will just hold off for 2 or 3 more weeks, because actually after we get a hard frost, it's very hard to find as many mushrooms after that. So if we can get some milder weather and some rain, I think the website is set up now where 4A leaders will start posting just kind of individual events that they're going to be doing to areas in Kitsap or even into the Cascades to look for mushrooms, and they'll be posting there what days they're going and asking you if you're interested to email them directly, and they will have a limit on how many people can join. It'll be essentially kind of first come, first serve. So we're really trying to get as many of those scheduled as we can, given that we're trying to do some scouting in advance. And so far, a lot of the scouting has turned up a lot of dry forest area without much mushroom activity so far, but it's getting rainy. So that's where we are for the fall right now. And yeah, so let me answer a few questions. Amy, posting where? So in the members section of the website, there is the members forum for forays and excursions. They will be posted there. Let's see. Did I miss any other questions? So also let me just say, in July, the board was very much on board that we were going to have our annual mushroom show this year, and that we were going to be able to do it in person, and that we were going to be able to do it at OC after a 1-year hiatus of not even having a show. That was in July when the COVID numbers were all tanking down and the vaccination rates were going up. And so that kind of stalled. When we reached back out to OC, they're like, no, at this point, they won't even let any non kind of OC groups have functions on their campus due to COVID. So, and then there were a lot of questions and discussion about, should we have a show somewhere else at a different site? And it essentially just came down to we couldn't figure out a way to quickly and easily have a live show with hopefully a lot of people there in a way that we felt like we could do it in a socially distanced way and in a way that respected what the other club members who typically volunteer and help put on the show wanted to have to help them stay safe and socially distanced. So at this point, there's no annual mushroom show that's going to happen this year. And on top of that, I mean, it would be just like killing everybody if there were so many mushrooms out there right now that we just wanted to pick and display and show people and just like educate and inform and do our outreach. But at this point, because we were actually thinking we might have it like this Sunday, that was going to be the date, and it would be a pretty slim pickings show anyway. So so what we're hoping is we'll do more membership focused events as soon as the mushrooms start coming out, and that we'll pick up next year, hopefully back at OC when the pandemic is over, as I keep saying, and get back on board with the public outreach. So that's where we are with forays right now. And I wish there were more forays scheduled, but people are out there scouting. And as soon as we've got spots identified, then we will start posting those. Yes, Kirsten, let me unmute you. Oh, Kirsten, I think you're still muted.
I would like to encourage some of our older, not old, but longer time members to reach out to their friends group or to some of the newbies to go with 1, 2, or 3 into the woods. You will find something. Maybe not a load full of chanterelles, but I mean, all the mushrooms I showed you, I did find today. So there is some stuff out there, and yeah, we even found one chanterelle today with the people I went, which made them very happy because they wanted to see one. And I found it in a completely, I would say, not the typical habitat, but you know, if those mushroom chromes like you, they pop one out. So then you can see it. So you shouldn't ever give up. You should just simply go and look what you find, and there will be something there. And if you have absolutely no idea what it is, yeah, you know, you can ask around online or some of us if we have a clue what it is. Anyway, I would totally appreciate it. Tom asked this question to make a foray. Yes, Tom, do it. Do it. Okay, he is holding his finger.
Yeah, Tom, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, yeah, I will do that. I'll let you know. I intended to do something at Banner this weekend, but it's far too dry. And Banner has an amazing array of different kinds of mushrooms, Suillus, lots of Russulas. And so when that starts popping up, I will post for a basically a newbie foray, but anybody else is welcome to join us. But our goal will be to gather chanterelles if we find them, but to identify as many species as we can and kind of get familiar with some of the wide range of things that are available here. And while I have the mic, I have two things I want to show. One is that this is what, this was 5 trays, 16 by 16 inch trays of, I've got to move my thing around, of oyster mushrooms. It's a big pile of dried oysters, and they're wonderful. I don't know how many pounds, maybe 6 or 7 pounds, and they dried up in a big tray, and I'm about to put them away. And the other thing I would like to say is that I'm working on. I can hardly wait till things get really wonderful, because I've got a particular mushroom I want to see again, and I'd like to show it to you right now if I can. This is I took this photograph last spring, and it is as far as I can tell, it is an Edulus grandedulus. That's a California breed mushroom, but it shows up here. There it is by my foot. And I think it's a grandedulus. It has a curved foot at the bottom. And as soon as I can get a fresh species of it, I'm going to send it off and try to get it identified as having officially moved into our area. So there are all kinds of things out there that you can find and discover and have a good time with. Thank you.
All right. I have 2 questions. Well, 1 question. The oysters, were you cultivating those, or did you pick those in the wild, or where'd you get those?
Oh, these came from Forest Ridge Park. We have lots of alders there, and they fall in the summertime when it dries out. And then when it rains on them in the fall, they grow these great blooms of oyster mushrooms. So every year I get somewhere close to 10 pounds of oysters and dry them. And I cook some of them. The fresh ones are really good to cook fresh. But what I do with these mostly is use them and throw them by the handfuls in stock that we use to make rice and other things with. So.
All right.
Okay, Tom, so you will make a newbie foray in Banner?
I will.
When?
I'll put a post up, maybe next weekend, not this one because it's still too dry, but I'll try for next weekend. And
it's really not too dry. I can tell you it rained quite a bit, and I was out today in a different state park. It's all there, and oysters are definitely out big time.
Absolutely.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think
and the fresh ones are just outstanding. These were beyond eating fresh. They were still good, but I dried them, and oh, what an amazing aroma they've got. God, it's wonderful.
Okay.
All right. So yes, so www.kitsapmushrooms.org, and go to the login page and look under members forum, and that's where people will be posting the excursions and forays that they are leading. And we still are working with our Green Mountain DNR partnership to get more forays going there. There were a couple, I think on the 9th, and I think they found some mushrooms, but it was relatively dry compared to other years. But yes, we're hoping to get some of those on the calendar as soon as the scouting and other issues get worked out. So keep your eyes open for that. And then also the in the newsletter usually has the forays that are there listed in the newsletter. I think this time there weren't any that were officially posted yet, so I'm not sure there was anything in there, but that's another source of information about how to know when the forays are happening.
We have a question. Somebody wants to have forays in a week because it can't do on weekends. Yeah, I can do in a week. I did this week already too. So shoot me an email. I put my email in the thing. So if folks cannot go on a weekend, then, you know, weekdays is also possible, depending a little bit of my other stuff to do. Okay.
All righty. 9 o'clock straight up.
Yep.
Leah, thank you so much. Kirsten, great job again. And feel free to check the website under the Forays and Excursions tab. And there's ways on the website to send emails to president and webmaster and treasurer, and we can all try to help you out. Okay.
Still, everyone. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you in the woods soon. And if not, next month, same time, same place. All right.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you
Thank you
so
for
much
coming.
for being there,
Thank
Leah.
you.
That was super awesome.
you.
Thank you.
And also for jumping in for such short notice.
Thank you very much.
No problem. My pleasure.
That was super cool. All right. And I still need your address or how you